So this city that you see is an analogy for a plant cell. So that's important that you know this is a plant cell. And the different parts of the city represent different organelles that you would find inside of a plant cell. So sometimes using an analogy can help us understand something. If we can compare something unknown, like an organelle, to something we're more familiar with, it can help us to understand what it does, how it works. So we have 9 different things to talk about. So number one is this fence around the outside of the city that's sort of protecting the city. 2 is sort of the gate, the guardhouse, I guess you might say, which is sort of part of that. So what do you think about the fence itself? Which part of a plant cell would that be? Michael?
Cell wall.
Yeah, that would be the cell wall. Remember, the cell wall is not a living part of the cell. It's sort of just a shell around the outside. Okay? But it helps to support and protect the plant cell. So what do you think about this gatekeeper, this guardhouse, who's going to determine who can come into or out of the city? What part in a plant cell is that similar to? Yeah? Yeah, that's the cell membrane, because the cell membrane is what regulates things moving into and out of the cell. Just like this guardhouse regulates who goes in or out of that space. Number 3, a construction site within the city, so it's building up something that's important in the city. We learned about one of the cell organelles that builds something. Michael?
Ribosome.
Yeah, this is the ribosome. Good. Because ribosomes, what do they make?
Protein.
Protein. And protein is really what the cell is mostly made out of. Proteins. So the ribosomes make proteins that become a part of the cell, like this construction site is building another building that's going to be part of the cell. Number 4, how about this transport company, this trucking company that's going to bring things to all these different places? Luke?
The ER.
Yeah, that's the ER. The ER is the cell's transport system that moves things within the cell. Now, what if this road had just led out of the cell? Then you might call it a different organelle. What if it were leading out of the cell? Brandon? Then it would be the Golgi bodies, but it's not. So you're right, it's ER. Because the Golgi bodies are what package things up to leave the cell. Number 5, power plant that makes electricity or energy for the city would be like what organelle in the cell? Alex? Yeah, that's the mitochondria. That's the powerhouse of the cell. Creates, or releases, I should say, the energy that the cell needs to function. Just like this power plant releases the energy the city needs. Question, you want to do it? Number 6, the greenhouse, where they're growing the food to feed the people in this town. What organelle would that greenhouse be like? What do you think, Luke?
The chloroplast.
Yeah, the chloroplast. Chloroplast makes food for the plant cell. Seven is this waste disposal facility that sort of takes care and gets rid of the waste, breaks down and removes the waste. Eva? No? Savannah? Yes, lysosomes. It breaks down the waste. How about number 8, the government building, which kind of controls what's happening inside of this city. Michael?
Nucleus?
Yeah, that's the nucleus. So how about number 9? These storage tanks where food and water is being stored. Which organelle is that?
I know this.
Robert?
Vacuole?
Yeah, the vacuole. Vacuoles are for storing materials. Good. So these analogies can help us understand what happens. So let's do this one last slide. It's, I think, a couple slides ahead. So, do you remember in the beginning of our living things unit, I asked you, what's the smallest living thing you could think of? And somebody said like an ant and stuff like that. But what did we eventually say is one of the very smallest living things? Sophia?
Bacteria.
Bacteria. Bacteria, how big is it? You can't see it. It's made of how many cells? Just one. It's one single tiny little cell. That's the smallest a living thing can be, a single cell. What we're talking about in this slide is the organization of life. Sort of when we think about living things, they have these various levels of organization, from very simple to most complex. Some animals are just nothing more than a cell. Some animals have tissues and cells. Some organisms have organs, tissues, and cells. Some have all of those. Depends how complex the organism is. So let's define these things. So first off, the cell. A cell, the basic definition is it's the basic unit of life. And all living things are made of cells. Whether it's a bacteria, which is just one cell, or a human that's trillions of cells. Everything's made of these cells. An example would be like a muscle cell. In our bodies, we have muscles, which are made of these tiny little cells. That's what a muscle cell looks like. This is the nucleus of a muscle cell. But also in our body, we have groups of these cells kind of working together to do some certain job. We call those cells that work together to do one job a tissue. A bunch of cells working together form a tissue. Like we have, did you guys learn in health about muscle tissue yet?
Yes.
There's 3 types of muscle tissue. Did you learn?
Kind of. No.
We got learned about
Smooth, skeletal, and cardiac muscle. Okay. Well, anyway, one type of muscle tissue is cardiac muscle tissue.
Yes, this was on our health test. We learned about it.
Well, also, these various types of tissue cooperate with each other, work together, and they form the next level, organs. Groups and tissues work. For example, cardiac tissue and nerve tissue. Okay, the muscle tissue all form our heart. That's an organ in our body. It's made of different types of tissue. If you take, like, for example, our heart, arteries, capillaries, veins, all of those organs working together form what we call an organ system. What system is that? What? Not the heart and arteries, circulatory or cardiovascular, it's sometimes called. That's a bunch of different organs all working together. Or just like our large intestine, small intestine, stomach, esophagus, mouth, those organs working together form the digestive system. That's cardiovascular system. And then finally, all of our various organ systems working together form a complete organism. An organism is just another word for one living thing, like a human or a wizard. Is a wizard a human?
Well, in Harry Potter, they choose these special humans. So, yes.
They're made into wizards?
Yeah.
Or they're born wizards?
They can be both.
All right, any questions about this? You will have to know the pattern. Cell, tissue, organ system, organism. So you have to know from simple to complex what these different levels are.